let me hand this back to Michael and Ian to talk a little bit about some key takeaways here and what we might want to think about moving forward.
Thanks, Simon. I'll just speak to a couple of the takeaways that we've had so far on this journey, where really our objectives to improve the visibility and connectivity across our sources has added a level of effectiveness for our members where they're seeing things that they wouldn't have otherwise. And they're also saving the time that it would take to search multiple repositories. And in terms of bringing enhanced insights to investigations, we've found that just doing one search can bring you in the right package so many more insights than you would have gleaned otherwise, and in a highly consumable way, which previously, as many of you would know from RMS search functionality being as basic as it is, you're never getting the key information highlighted to you. It's not often sorted by how relevant it is to what you were looking for. And it's absolutely not connecting things across systems, which we're able to do today. And finally, today, and then more so as we move forward, we're really working to improve that awareness, that operational insight, and the support about what is going on around me and what's relevant to the job that I'm doing. And so those are the big things from our end that we're taking away from this and we're leveraging as we continue forward.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I think also as we mapped out a journey, a maturity matrix, we try to institutionalize a process to get there. That this isn't an overnight thing. It's a stepwise approach, looking at maximum impact to gain traction before you get too far. So I think as we've worked together, that's been our approach to try to make sure that the stakeholders and teams educated in the capabilities of the system, not to oversell or oversimplify it in a lot of areas. But where we've implemented just the basic platform, I think we've seen and gotten feedback from the audience, meaning investigators and constables, that it's a significant improvement and helps them in their day-to-day tasks. And that's just the foundation. It's not even the more advanced capabilities yet. So we're on to Q&A. So if you have any questions that you'd like, put them into the Zoom. And we are in the year that everyone actually knows how to use Zoom. Q&A panel, we'll try to pick out a couple to shoot to the panel here. I've got Ian, when did you start the current initiative, and what were these are two questions combined into one, I guess, relative then to now, and what were the particular milestones that you had to face in order to get funding?
It's a good question. We started, I want to say, about 4 years ago, when this technology would have been a little bit more new to people. Now it's matured to a point where it's more commonly seen. However, 4 years ago, we started with really just trying to help uncover our information assets for the people who needed them, and not even trying to unleash a bunch of data that people didn't already have access to, really just make it more available and more consumable. And so in doing that, we went through traditional procurement routes of doing an RFP and all of the ground research to get to the stage of doing an RFP, launching that. That's how we met MC+A and acquired the technology that's become Global Search. And from that point, we got funding through a series of grants. I want to say we had 3 or 4 grant initiatives that funded this, and we moved it from what was originally a proof of concept to a minimum viable product to where we are presently as a pilot. And at this moment, we're transitioning to an actual capital project where Global Search becomes an enterprise-wide platform that I would fully expect gets extended across a number of other use cases. So we proved at first the usefulness and the viability of a search platform. And then we were able to continue beyond that. So I would suggest that it is and has been a very agile approach. And we moved, again, just building momentum along the way. There wasn't an easy path to any funding, and there wasn't anything that was really multi-year until literally just this year. And so now we've got a path that takes us forward over the next 4 years, after which this will become an operational program.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and something that you and I have worked together on. As the technology doesn't as awesome as we think it is, as powerful as we think it is, it doesn't necessarily sell itself. That there's a business case, even in government, to make the case for using it and educating the people who have the control of either those grants or the capital budget. And that's something that I think we've worked on together to, or me feeding you up information to translate it to more of your strategy for that. I think this is an easy one to lay up for Canadians. OpenNet. Which RMS does Toronto use?
Oh, we use a system called Versadex. A company called Versaterm provides that application. I think it's used fairly broadly in the US. Correct.
I was going to say it's not only in Canada. There's probably 20 or 30 agencies here in the States doing that as well. In terms of the roadmap, how did you prioritize things along that? Because everyone wants a big bang. Was there anything that or methodology that you used to maximize what got done, particularly for the audience, the stakeholders, or the community?
Yeah, so we started off internal. That was the key piece, is to find internal stakeholders who would most benefit from it. So we picked or asked if they would participate, our homicide unit and our operations center, the real-time ops center, two groups in the organization who need to consume information above many others and have a highly legislative requirement to do so. And so from that perspective, we brought them in early, and they became our use cases. And so as I mentioned before, we took an agile approach. So we started off with just proving the concept. Would this work, and would members of our organization use it if we had it? So we did start off really small grants, small scale, small timelines, and then we moved forward with each phase from there. And so the roadmap really looks like a gradual scaling of the capabilities and implementing across an organization. So whereas it started small, and with would this concept even work? What kind of data can we put into this? What sort of work effort is required? What sort of technology, like from a hardware server perspective, would we need to procure? And is that feasible? And then we procured it over time. So the smaller grants at the start, we procured the hardware that we use today, and the storage from a server and data perspective that we use today to leverage the licensing that we need to make this product and platform available widely. And so global search scales from there, where subsequently became a minimum viable product. So it worked on a relatively small scale and for a small group of people. And then that merged into the pilot phase, where we are today available service-wide and using a high value live data source, which was considered very problematic from a lot of members of the organization, from a limited capability to search and retrieve relevant information.
Okay. So here's a question. I'm going to change it a little because it's something that I know that we have tackled directly. So how is implicit bias such as race being handled in the existing data when being fed, as to not create negative feedback loops within your insights and algorithms?
Good question. We've actually turned off a lot of the AI ML capabilities. So we're starting right at the outset with basic search functionality, and we're not driving insights that are much beyond combining relevant results. So based on the key terms that are provided, we're really just giving the direct search results across those systems. So we're not doing things like the recommendation for people like you, members like you searched for this, you might also want to search for this. Or even for you as an individual member, it's not recommending things like you recently searched for these things, you might also want to search for these things. So we're not doing that. And there's a number of reasons that we're not doing that. One is because of the implicit bias within that data set, and we don't want to infer things that ought not to be inferred. And then the second is really important because from an investigative perspective, we're not at the point where we want to be able to make recommendations to investigators that they wouldn't have otherwise arrived at themselves through the course of that investigation. So as many of you from a law enforcement perspective would know, as you do an investigation, you'll uncover evidence, and the evidence is presented sometimes. Sometimes you find it because you followed these leads. And so in following those leads, you need to be able to demonstrate the steps that you took and how you came to recognize that piece. And some of the recommendation capabilities, although likely very useful, we haven't turned those on because we don't want to put in front of somebody something that we can't explain in court reliably how they came to know that. And so although those functionalities are there and they are likely very, very useful, we're not going there yet. We're taking a relatively slow path. And as we do that, we're going to examine very structurally and possibly with input, actually definitely with input from the legal community, likely input on those subjects from a broader community as well. And we'll probably co-design some policies around the usefulness of that.
Yeah, I think that was something that was very interesting and we worked hard to prevent. And that is to say that based on the data and trends, naturally machine learning algorithms would hone in on those and potentially subject people to a negative bias. There are opportunities that we've discussed to look at trying to find processes that some of the best investigators use and then institutionalize it through algorithms so that younger, because we had Stacy retire, for example, and I felt like this is someone who's been on the force for 30, 40 years. How can we transition how he would go about the investigation to someone who just came from the academy? And I think there's opportunities there to work through it. But overall, we've taken a defensive position because the last thing we would want is to solve a crime, but then weaken the legal portion of it because of something like that that's not been, we don't have enough precedent yet for it. But that is something definitely to consider on both sides, how it can be used and how not to game the system, so to speak. There's another question here. How have you handled the scale and sheer volume of data? Were there any specific issues that you struck? I'll let you.
Yeah. There's, well, obviously, like the platform itself is designed to handle high volumes of data. So the volume of the data wasn't necessarily the issue. It's how do you make it consumable? And so that would be from our end mapping the original data source. What are the things that people need to see? What's most relevant to them? And how do you make that condensed to a point where they can do the search, look at the information and understand what that means. So that's probably where we spent most of our time. And I'd probably consider that mostly to be like a user interface, user experience problem that we spent a lot of time exploring and working through iterations of what's the best experience that we should have.
Yeah, very good point. I'll comment. We have one question, then we have to wrap up. So the challenge isn't the search system. It could be appropriately sized. So the platform that we've installed has no issues in theory or in practice. The challenge is to get the data out of your source systems. There's an old joke that SAP eats like an elephant and poops like a mouse. So you can get the data in easily, but to get the data out, that's the challenge. And so we kind of have to get the data out. So if you have any of those challenges, it will come from your source systems. And we just have one last one. To ensure reliable decisions and appropriate actions, how does TPS ensure data accuracy and completeness, both newly created and pre-existing?
That's a good question. So historical, so the pre-existing had a lot of rigor around the occurrence creation system. So we historically had what I'll call a wizard. So if you're an officer who's going to a gun-related occurrence, you go to that, you dispatch that call, you arrive on scene, you do whatever you have to do. As the occurrence preparing officer, you literally, as you're filling out your report on this, you follow through a wizard. So it captures all of that information completely. Today, we don't have that same system. And so we ended up creating a data quality group, which exists in part centrally and in part decentrally. So each of our divisions across the organizations, or our precincts, depending on how you refer to those, they all have quality control people who do follow-ups based on gaps or errors in the data that's been collected. And then also what's happening now that we've implemented global search, missing information is highlighted. So if you're the officer who entered the report that's missing something that's key, and another officer or even yourself are searching it's evident that that's missing. And so there's an incentivization from the data creator to put in better data so that when you search it, it's going to come up.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And to anyone who has a follow-up question, you can pop us on Twitter or send an email, and we'll be happy to follow up any missed questions or follow through. I want to thank Simon and Ian for taking the time out today and the time leading up to this to prep this call. I think it's always insightful to hear the background of Ian and Simon. And again, thank you for your time, and everyone be safe.
Thank you. And thanks, everyone.